A carriage rattled through the storm-lashed night, its wheels splashing through puddles on the cobbled streets of London. Inside, Miss Eleanor Hartley pressed herself into the corner, her threadbare cloak soaked through, her fingers numb with cold. She had accepted a position as a lady's companion in the countryside, a last desperate grasp at survival after her father's debts had consumed everything. But exhaustion claimed her before the journey's end, and when the carriage finally stopped, a footman mistook her for an expected guest. Half asleep, Eleanor stumbled through grand corridors, pushed open what she believed was her assigned chamber, and collapsed upon the finest bed she had ever touched. She did not see the figure already occupying that room. She did not hear his sharp intake of breath. And she certainly did not expect to wake at dawn to find Alexander Ashford, the Duke of Ravensmere, seated beside her bed, his dark eyes fixed upon her face, whispering words that would shatter her world. "I've waited for you." If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The London rain fell in sheets that November evening in 1818, turning the narrow streets of Clerkenwell into rivers of filth and despair. Eleanor Hartley stood at the window of the cramped lodging-house, watching the lamplighters struggle against the wind. Her reflection in the glass showed a young woman of 22, with auburn hair pulled severely back and grey eyes that had learned too early to expect disappointment. She possessed the kind of beauty that poverty attempted to disguise. High cheekbones, a graceful neck, pale skin that spoke of genteel origins, but her worn dress and mended gloves told the truer story. "The carriage will arrive within the hour," Mrs. Pemberton announced from the doorway, her voice carrying the particular sharpness of landladies owed 3 months' rent. "I trust you have your affairs in order, Miss Hartley." Eleanor turned from the window, her spine straightening with practiced dignity. "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton, thank you for your patience." Patience. What a generous word for the woman's barely concealed eagerness to see her gone. Eleanor gathered her few possessions, a battered trunk containing 2 dresses, her mother's prayer book, and a miniature portrait of her father before disgrace had hollowed his cheeks and dimmed his eyes. 6 months ago she had been Miss Eleanor Hartley of Hartley House in Sussex, daughter of a respected country gentleman. Then came her father's ruinous investment in a fraudulent shipping venture, the creditors, the auction of everything they owned, and finally his death from a broken heart disguised as influenza. She had tried to find respectable employment in London. But a young woman alone, without connections or references, discovered quickly that respectability was a luxury she could not afford. The positions offered to her came with leering suggestions and wandering hands. She had fled 3 households in as many months, each time with less money and fewer options. Then came the letter from Mrs. Agatha Thornbury, seeking a companion for her niece at Thornbury Hall in Derbyshire. The wages were modest, but the position promised safety, distance from London's predatory opportunities, and perhaps a chance to rebuild some fragment of dignity. The carriage that arrived was better than Eleanor had expected, a well-maintained travelling coach with the Thornbury crest discreetly painted on the door. The driver, a weathered man named Hobbs, helped her inside with surprising courtesy. "It's a long journey, miss," he said, placing a heated brick at her feet. "We'll stop twice to change horses. Best get some rest." Eleanor settled into the cushioned seat, a luxury she had not experienced in months. As the carriage lurched forward into the storm, she allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something better. Perhaps she could finally stop running. The rhythm of the wheels, the warmth of the brick, and the exhaustion of weeks spent in anxious uncertainty combined into an irresistible lullaby. Eleanor's eyes grew heavy. She told herself she would rest for just a moment, just until they cleared the city. She did not wake when they changed horses at the first posting inn. She did not wake when they turned north onto unfamiliar roads. and she did not wake when, through a confusion of similar crests and expected arrivals, the carriage delivered her not to Thornbury Hall, but to Ravensmere Abbey, ancestral seat of the Duke of Ravensmere. The footman who opened the carriage door saw only a young woman in travelling clothes, clearly exhausted, and assumed she was the distant cousin expected from Bath. In the chaos of the storm and the late hour, no one questioned the mistake. Eleanor, barely conscious, was guided through marble halls that gleamed in candlelight, up a grand staircase that would have stolen her breath had she been awake to see it, and finally to a chamber that had been prepared for a guest. But it was the wrong chamber. In her fog of exhaustion, Eleanor had turned left instead of right, had pushed open a door that should have been locked, and had stumbled toward the massive four-poster bed that dominated the room. She collapsed upon it, still wearing her cloak, her muddy half-boots leaving marks on the pristine coverlet, and fell into the deep sleep of the truly spent. She did not see the door to the adjoining dressing room open an hour later. She did not see the tall figure that emerged, dressed in shirt-sleeves and breeches, his dark hair dishevelled from his own attempted rest. She did not see Alexander Ashford, 7th Duke of Ravensmere, freeze in the doorway of his own bedchamber, staring at the impossible sight of a woman sleeping in his bed. And she certainly did not see the expression that crossed his face. Shock giving way to something far more complex, something that looked almost like recognition, as he moved closer and saw her face in the firelight. "Good God," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "It cannot be." He stood there for a long moment, this man who commanded one of the greatest fortunes in England, who had been pursued by every ambitious mother with a marriageable daughter, who had built walls around himself so high that society had begun to whisper he would never marry at all. He stood there and looked at the sleeping girl, with the auburn hair and the worn cloak, and something shifted in his carefully controlled world. Finally, he moved to the chair beside the bed and sat down, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that chamber, Alexander Ashford waited for dawn, with the patience of a man who had been waiting for something or someone far longer than a single night. When Eleanor's eyes finally opened to the grey morning light, the first thing she saw was his face, and the first words she heard would echo in her mind for days to come. "I've waited for you." Eleanor's scream caught in her throat, emerging as a strangled gasp. She scrambled backward on the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind struggling to reconcile sleep with this impossible waking. The man in the chair did not move, though his dark eyes tracked her every motion with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Please," he said quietly, raising one hand in a calming gesture. "You are not in danger, though I confess the circumstances are irregular." Eleanor's breath came in short gasps as she took in her surroundings properly for the first time. This was not the modest chamber she had expected at Thornbury Hall. The room was vast, decorated in deep blues and silver, with furniture that spoke of wealth beyond her comprehension. The bed beneath her was large enough for 4 people, its posts carved with intricate designs. And the man watching her, he was perhaps 30 years old, with the kind of aristocratic features that belonged on Roman coins. A strong jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes so dark they appeared black in the morning light. His shirt was open at the collar, his hair slightly dishevelled, and there was something in his expression that unsettled her more than fear, a kind of desperate hope that seemed entirely out of place on such a commanding face. "Who are you?" Eleanor managed, her voice hoarse. "Where am I?" "You are at Ravensmere Abbey," he replied, his voice carrying the cultured accent of the highest nobility. "And I am Alexander Ashford, the Duke of Ravensmere." He paused, then added with a hint of dark humour, "And this is my bedchamber, which makes your presence here rather complicated." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. A duke's bedchamber. She was ruined, utterly, completely ruined. Even if nothing had happened, and she was certain nothing had, The mere fact of her presence here would destroy what little remained of her reputation. I never meant. She struggled to form coherent words. There has been a terrible mistake. I was travelling to Thornbury Hall. Mrs. Thornbury engaged me as a companion. The carriage brought you here instead, the Duke finished. Yes, I have pieced together that much. My housekeeper informs me that a distant cousin was expected from Bath yesterday evening. In the confusion of the storm and the late hour, the staff assumed you were she. His lips curved in a smile that did not reach his eyes. Though that does not explain how you came to be in my chamber rather than the one prepared for guests. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering her exhausted stumble through unfamiliar corridors. I was so tired. I thought I must have taken a wrong turn. Indeed. The Duke rose from his chair with fluid grace, and Eleanor instinctively pressed herself further back against the headboard. He noticed and stopped, maintaining his distance. Miss Hartley. It is Miss Hartley, is it not? I found a letter in your cloak pocket. I apologize for the intrusion, but I needed to understand who you were. The fact that he had searched her belongings should have outraged her, but Eleanor was too overwhelmed to summon proper indignation. Yes, Eleanor Hartley. Miss Hartley, I must ask you a question, and I beg you to answer truthfully. He moved to the window, his profile silhouetted against the grey morning light. Have we met before? The question startled her. No, Your Grace. I'm quite certain we have not. I would remember. She stopped, realizing how presumptuous that sounded. Would you? He turned back to her, and there was something haunting in his expression. 6 months ago, I was travelling through Sussex. My carriage broke an axle near a village called Hartwell. While my men made repairs, I walked to the local church. It was raining, much like last night, and in that churchyard, I saw a young woman placing flowers on a fresh grave. She was weeping, but trying to hide it as though she had no right to her own grief. She had auburn hair and grey eyes, and when she looked up and saw me, she apologized for disturbing my solitude, as though her sorrow was an inconvenience to a stranger. Eleanor's breath caught. She remembered that day. Her father had been dead a week, and she had gone to his grave to escape the creditors who were cataloguing every possession in their house. A gentleman had been standing near the church entrance, but she had barely glanced at him through her tears. That was you, she whispered. I have thought of that moment every day since, the Duke said quietly. I did not speak to you. I did not offer comfort. I simply watched you walk away, and I have regretted my silence ever since. I made inquiries, learned your name, learned of your father's death and your family's misfortune. I tried to find you, but you had already left for London. Eleanor stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. Why? Why would you? Because in that moment I saw something I had never seen before. He moved closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. I saw genuine grief, unperformed and unadorned. I saw dignity in the face of loss, and I saw a kind of beauty that had nothing to do with fine clothes or practiced manners. I saw you, Miss Hartley, and I have been unable to forget. That is impossible, Eleanor said, though her voice lacked conviction. You are a duke. I am no one. You cannot have spent 6 months thinking of a chance encounter with a penniless girl in a churchyard. And yet I have. He sat down in the chair again, as though his legs would no longer support him. I am not a romantic man, Miss Hartley. I am known for my cold pragmatism, my business acumen, my complete lack of sentimentality. But that day in Sussex, something changed. And when I found you sleeping in my bed last night, when I saw your face in the firelight, I thought perhaps fate was offering me a second chance. Eleanor's mind reeled. This could not be happening. Dukes did not fall in love with impoverished girls in churchyards. They did not wait 6 months for a second meeting. They certainly did not confess such things to those girls while they sat dishevelled and terrified in the Duke's own bed. Your Grace, she said carefully, I appreciate that you have been kind enough not to. That is, I am grateful for your restraint, but I must leave immediately. If anyone discovers that I spent the night here, they already have, a new voice said from the doorway. Both Eleanor and the Duke turned to see a woman standing in the entrance to the chamber. She was perhaps 50 years old, dressed in an elegant morning gown, with silver-streaked dark hair and the same commanding features as the Duke. Her expression was one of carefully controlled shock. "Alexander," she said quietly, "what have you done?" The Duke rose, his jaw tightening. "Aunt Beatrice, this is not what it appears." "Indeed." Lady Beatrice Ashford stepped into the room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Eleanor's rumpled travelling clothes, the muddy marks on the coverlet, the Duke's state of undress. "Then perhaps you can explain why there is a young woman in your bedchamber and why the entire household is currently buzzing with speculation about your midnight guest." Eleanor felt the room spin. This was worse than she had imagined. Not only had she been discovered, but the Duke's own aunt, a woman whose opinion clearly mattered, had found them together. "There has been a misunderstanding," the Duke began, but his aunt cut him off with a sharp gesture. "The only misunderstanding, nephew, is if you believe this situation can be resolved without scandal." She turned to Eleanor, her expression softening slightly. "What is your name, child?" "Eleanor Hartley, my lady," Eleanor managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And how did you come to be here, Miss Hartley?" Eleanor explained, her words tumbling over each other in her haste. The position at Thornbury Hall, the exhausting journey, her accidental arrival at the wrong estate, her mistaken entry into the wrong chamber. Lady Beatrice listened without interruption, her face revealing nothing. When Eleanor finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Lady Beatrice spoke, her words measured and deliberate. "I believe you, Miss Hartley. And I believe my nephew when he says nothing improper occurred. Unfortunately, belief and reputation are not the same thing. By now, every servant in this house knows that a young woman spent the night in the Duke's chamber. By tomorrow, every household in the county will know, and by the end of the week, it will be the talk of London." "No," Eleanor breathed. "Please, there must be some way." "There is one way," the Duke said suddenly. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Miss Hartley and I will marry." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor's vision blurred, and she gripped the bedpost to keep from falling. This could not be happening. This was not real. "Alexander," Lady Beatrice said warningly, "you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious." He turned to Eleanor, and in his eyes she saw not pity, but determination. "Miss Hartley, I know this is not the proposal you might have dreamed of, but I am offering you my name, my protection, and my respect. In return, I ask only that you give me the chance to prove that what I felt in that churchyard was not mere fancy, but recognition." Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You do not know me. You cannot wish to marry me. I know that you are brave enough to face loss with dignity. I know that you are strong enough to survive circumstances that would break others. And I know that when I saw you sleeping in my bed, I felt more alive than I have in years." He took a step closer. "I am not asking you to love me, Miss Hartley. I am asking you to let me try to earn that love." "This is madness," Eleanor whispered. "Perhaps," the Duke agreed. "But it is also the only solution that preserves your honor and gives us both what we need. You need security, protection, and a place in the world. And I need—" He paused, then finished quietly, "I need you to stay." Lady Beatrice moved to Eleanor's side, her voice gentle. "My nephew is right about one thing, Miss Hartley. Your reputation is already compromised. If you leave here without his protection, you will find no position, no refuge, no peace. Society is cruel to women in your situation, but as the Duchess of Ravensmere, you would be untouchable." Eleanor looked between them, her mind struggling to find some escape from this impossible situation. But even as she searched, she knew the truth. She had no family, no money, no prospects. And now, thanks to a series of accidents and misunderstandings, she had no reputation either. The Duke was offering her salvation. It came in a form she had never imagined, wrapped in circumstances that seemed more like a fever dream than reality, but it was salvation nonetheless. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what would you expect of me?" "Time," the Duke replied. "Time to know each other. Time to build something real from this strange beginning. And honesty, I would expect honesty between us always." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. When she opened them again, she saw the Duke watching her with an expression that was almost vulnerable, as though her answer mattered more than anything else in his carefully ordered world. "Very well," she whispered. "I will marry you." The Duke's face transformed, relief and something deeper flooding his features. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I swear to you, Eleanor, you will not regret this." But as Lady Beatrice began discussing arrangements and timelines, as the impossible became inevitable, Eleanor could not shake the feeling that she had just stepped off a cliff into unknown darkness, and she had no idea whether the Duke of Ravensmere would be her salvation or her ruin. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity that left Eleanor breathless and bewildered. Lady Beatrice took command of the situation with military precision, transforming the scandal into a romantic tale of love at first sight. According to the story carefully disseminated through society, the Duke had met Miss Hartley months ago, had courted her discreetly, and the overnight stay had been a deliberate elopement thwarted only by his aunt's timely intervention, leading to a proper engagement. It was a thin fiction, but delivered with Lady Beatrice's authority and the Duke's unassailable reputation, society chose to accept it. After all, the Duke of Ravensmere was too powerful to snub, and his choice of bride, however unusual, would simply have to be accommodated. Eleanor found herself installed in a guest chamber that was larger than the entire lodging house where she had lived in London. A team of seamstresses arrived from London, bringing fabrics and fashion plates, measuring and pinning, and creating a wardrobe suitable for a future duchess. She stood for hours while they worked, feeling like a doll being dressed for display. "You have an excellent figure, Miss Hartley," the head seamstress declared, her mouth full of pins. "Slender but not thin, with a natural grace. The current fashions will suit you admirably." Eleanor said nothing, watching her reflection in the mirror as she was transformed from a penniless companion into something else entirely. The woman looking back at her wore a morning dress of pale blue muslin with delicate embroidery at the hem. Her hair, which she had always worn in a severe knot, had been arranged in soft curls that framed her face. She looked like a stranger. Lady Beatrice supervised everything with a critical eye. "You must understand, my dear," she said one afternoon as they took tea in the morning room, "that being a duchess requires more than fine clothes. You will be scrutinized, judged, and discussed. Every word you speak, every gesture you make will be analyzed for signs of your unsuitability." "I am unsuitable," Eleanor replied quietly. "We both know that." "Nonsense." Lady Beatrice set down her teacup with a decisive click. "You are a gentleman's daughter, educated and well-mannered. You have simply been unfortunate. There is nothing in your background that disqualifies you from this position, and everything in your character that recommends you for it. You are kind to say so, my lady, but—" "I am not kind, Miss Hartley. I am practical." Lady Beatrice's expression softened slightly. "I have watched my nephew for years, turning away every eligible young woman in England. He has been pursued by heiresses, beauties, and women of impeccable lineage. He has rejected them all with a coldness that borders on cruelty. And then he sees you in a churchyard and spends 6 months searching for you. That tells me something important." "What does it tell you?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "That my nephew, for all his pragmatism, is capable of recognizing something real when he sees it. And that you, my dear, possess something those other women lack." Lady Beatrice leaned forward. "Do you know what I think it is?" Eleanor shook her head. "Authenticity. You are not performing for him. You are not calculating how to capture his interest or secure his fortune. You are simply yourself, frightened, overwhelmed, but fundamentally honest. And for a man who has been hunted by fortune seekers his entire adult life, that honesty is more precious than any dowry." Eleanor absorbed this, uncertain how to respond. She had seen the Duke only briefly since that first morning. Formal meetings in the presence of Lady Beatrice, discussions of wedding arrangements and legal settlements. He had been unfailingly courteous, but distant, as though the man who had confessed to thinking of her every day had been replaced by a polite stranger. "Does he regret his offer?" she asked suddenly. Lady Beatrice's eyebrows rose. "What makes you think that?" "He barely speaks to me. He looks at me as though I am a problem to be solved, rather than a woman he wishes to marry." "Ah," Lady Beatrice smiled. "My nephew is terrified, Miss Hartley. He has taken the most impulsive action of his life, and now he is second-guessing himself. He fears he has trapped you into this marriage, that you will come to resent him, that his moment of romantic impulse will lead to a lifetime of mutual misery. He said he wanted time to know each other," Eleanor said, "but he avoids me." "Then perhaps you should stop waiting for him to come to you." Lady Beatrice's eyes gleamed with something like mischief. "The library is his favorite refuge. He goes there every afternoon at 3 o'clock to review correspondence. I suggest you make use of that information." That afternoon, Eleanor found herself standing outside the library door, her heart pounding. She had dressed carefully in one of her new gowns, a simple dress of green muslin that Lady Beatrice had declared brought out the colour of her eyes, and arranged her hair in the softer style the lady's maid had taught her. But beneath the fine clothes, she was still Eleanor Hartley, terrified and uncertain. She knocked. "Enter," came the Duke's voice. She pushed open the door and stepped into a room that took her breath away. The library was vast, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Tall windows let in the afternoon light, and a fire crackled in the marble fireplace. The Duke sat at a massive desk, papers spread before him, his dark head bent in concentration. He looked up as she entered, and surprise flickered across his face. "Miss Hartley, I did not expect—" He rose quickly, papers forgotten. "Is something wrong?" "No, Your Grace. I simply thought—" She faltered, suddenly uncertain of her purpose. "Your aunt suggested that we should spend time together, to know each other, as you said we should." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or hope. "She is right, of course. I have been—" He gestured helplessly at the papers. "Hiding, I suppose. Using work as an excuse to avoid facing what I have done." His honesty surprised her. "What have you done, Your Grace?" "Trapped you," he said simply. "Forced you into a marriage you never wanted with a man you do not know. Used your vulnerability and my position to secure something I desired without considering what you might desire." Eleanor moved closer, drawn by the raw self-recrimination in his voice. "You offered me salvation when I had none. You protected my reputation when it would have been easier to simply send me away. And you have treated me with nothing but respect, even when circumstances gave you every opportunity to take advantage. That is the bare minimum of decent behavior," he said. "It does not justify what I have done." "Perhaps not." Eleanor reached the desk, separated from him by only a few feet of polished wood. "But it does suggest that you are not the villain you seem determined to paint yourself as." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the same intensity that had been in his eyes that first morning. "I saw you in that churchyard, Eleanor. May I call you Eleanor?" She nodded, her throat tight. "I saw you, and something in me recognized something in you. I cannot explain it better than that. It was not your beauty, though you are beautiful. It was not your circumstances, though they moved me to pity. It was something deeper, something that felt like—" He stopped, shaking his head. "You will think me mad." "Tell me anyway," she said softly. "It felt like coming home," he finished quietly. "As though I had been searching for something my entire life without knowing what it was. And suddenly there you were, weeping over your father's grave, and I thought, there she is." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not know what to say to that." "You do not have to say anything." He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. "I know I cannot expect you to feel the same. I know this marriage is one of necessity for you, not choice. But I hope I desperately hope that given time, you might come to feel even a fraction of what I feel." "And what do you feel, Your Grace?" "Alexander," he corrected gently. "If we are to be married, you must call me Alexander." "Alexander," she repeated, and watched something warm kindle in his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. "I feel," he said slowly, "as though I have been given an unexpected gift, and I am terrified of proving unworthy of it." They stood there in the afternoon light, two people bound together by accident and choice, by necessity, and something that might, given time, become more. Eleanor felt the weight of the future pressing down on her, but for the first time since that terrible morning, she also felt a flicker of something else. Hope. "Will you tell me about yourself?" Alexander asked. "Not the facts I learned from my inquiries, but the real things. What you love, what you fear, what you dream of, when you allow yourself to dream." And so Eleanor did. She told him about her childhood in Sussex, about her father's kindness and her mother's early death. She told him about her love of reading, her talent for watercolors, her secret wish to travel beyond England's shores. She told him about the terror of watching her world collapse, about the predatory men in London, about the bone-deep exhaustion that had led her to fall asleep in his carriage. And Alexander listened with an attention that felt like a physical touch, as though every word she spoke was precious. When she finished, he told her his own story, the loneliness of being raised for duty rather than love, the weight of a title inherited too young, the isolation that came from never knowing if people wanted him or simply wanted what he represented. "I have been alone in crowded rooms my entire life," he said, "surrounded by people who wanted something from me, but never simply wanted me." "And you think I'm different?" Eleanor asked. "I know you are," he replied. "Because you did not want me at all. You wanted safety, security, a position as a companion. You never sought to capture a duke. And that, Eleanor, makes you the only person I have ever met who might actually see me rather than my title." The clock on the mantel chimed 5, and Eleanor realized they had been talking for 2 hours. The light outside had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the library floor. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "Lady Beatrice will wonder where I am." "Oh, my aunt knows exactly where you are," Alexander said with a slight smile. "She is a shameless matchmaker, and she has decided we suit each other." "Do we?" Eleanor asked. "Suit each other?" Alexander reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm, his fingers gentle as they curled around hers. "I believe we might," he said quietly, "if you will give us the chance to find out." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his strength and her delicacy, and felt something shift inside her chest. This was not the love story she had imagined as a girl. There were no grand gestures, no passionate declarations, but there was honesty and kindness and the tentative beginning of something that might, with time and care, grow into something real. "I will try," she whispered. "I cannot promise more than that, but I will try." "That is all I ask," Alexander replied. And in the fading light of the library, with their hands still joined, Eleanor began to believe that perhaps this strange, impossible marriage might not be a disaster after all. Perhaps it might even be the beginning of something extraordinary. The wedding took place on a crisp December morning in the private chapel at Ravensmere Abbey. Despite Lady Beatrice's efforts to keep the ceremony small and intimate, the pews were filled with nobility who had travelled from London, their curiosity barely concealed beneath polite smiles. They had come to witness the impossible. The Duke of Ravensmere, that most elusive of bachelors, marrying a nobody from Sussex. Eleanor stood in the bride's chamber, staring at her reflection with a sense of unreality that had not diminished in the 3 weeks since her engagement. The woman in the mirror wore a gown of ivory silk, with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline, her auburn hair dressed with orange blossoms, her grey eyes wide with apprehension. She looked like a duchess. She felt like an impostor. "You are beautiful, my dear," Lady Beatrice said, adjusting Eleanor's veil with gentle hands. And more importantly, you are ready for this. Am I? Eleanor's voice trembled slightly. I do not feel ready. I feel as though I'm about to step onto a stage and perform a role I have never learned. Marriage is a performance for everyone, at least at first. Lady Beatrice turned Eleanor to face her expression serious. But what you and Alexander have is more honest than most society marriages. You are not pretending to be in love. You are simply promising to try. That is more than most couples can claim. A knock at the door announced that it was time. Eleanor took a deep breath, gripped her bouquet of winter roses, and allowed herself to be led to the chapel. The ceremony passed in a blur. She was aware of Alexander standing beside her, tall and commanding in his dark coat, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. She heard herself repeat the words that would bind her to him for life, felt the cool metal of the ring as he slipped it onto her finger, and saw something like triumph flash in his dark eyes when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride, your grace," the vicar said with a smile. Alexander turned to Eleanor, and for a moment she saw uncertainty in his face, as though he feared she might pull away. But she held still as he lifted her veil, as he cupped her face gently in his hands, and as he pressed a kiss to her lips that was both chaste and somehow deeply intimate. It lasted only seconds, but when he pulled back, Eleanor felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. "My Duchess," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. "My Eleanor." The wedding breakfast that followed was an elaborate affair, with toasts and speeches and barely veiled speculation about the speed of the courtship. Eleanor sat at the head table, Alexander's hand occasionally finding hers beneath the tablecloth, and tried to smile at the appropriate moments, but it was during the dancing that the true test came. Eleanor had just finished a country dance with one of Alexander's cousins, when she found herself approached by a woman she did not recognize. She was perhaps 30 years old, beautiful in a cold, calculated way, with blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls, and a dress that was just slightly too revealing for a wedding. "So, you are the new Duchess," the woman said, her voice carrying a sweetness that did not reach her eyes. "How unexpected." "Lady Cordelia Hastings," Lady Beatrice said, appearing at Eleanor's elbow with the timing of a guardian angel. "How kind of you to attend. I would not have missed it for the world." Lady Cordelia's smile sharpened. "After all, it is not every day that a duke marries so far beneath himself. One must witness such events to believe them." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Alexander was there, his hand settling possessively on her waist. "Lady Cordelia," he said, his voice cold enough to frost glass, "I see you have met my wife. Eleanor, Lady Cordelia is the daughter of the Earl of Hastings. She was briefly considered as a potential duchess some years ago, but I found her unsuitable." The insult was delivered with such casual brutality that Lady Cordelia actually flinched. "Your Grace, I merely meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," Alexander interrupted. "And I will say this once for you and for anyone else who might question my choice. Eleanor is my wife, my Duchess, and the woman I have chosen above all others. Anyone who treats her with anything less than the respect she deserves will find themselves no longer welcome in my home or my presence. Am I understood?" Lady Cordelia's face had gone white. She curtsied stiffly and retreated, leaving Eleanor staring up at her new husband in shock. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did." Alexander's hand tightened on her waist. "You are mine to protect now, Eleanor, and I will not tolerate anyone making you feel less than you are." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her, but instead Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had been alone, unprotected, vulnerable. To have someone willing to defend her, to claim her so publicly, was both terrifying and deeply comforting. The rest of the wedding passed without incident, though Eleanor was aware of the whispers that followed her, the speculative glances, the barely concealed curiosity. She was a puzzle they could not solve, a disruption in their carefully ordered world. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself alone in the Duchess's chambers, her chambers now staring at the connecting door that led to Alexander's rooms. They had not discussed the wedding night, had not spoken of expectations or obligations. Eleanor had been grateful for the omission, but now, faced with the reality of it, she felt panic rising in her throat. A knock at the connecting door made her jump. "Eleanor?" Alexander's voice came through the wood. "May I come in?" "Yes," she managed, her voice barely audible. He entered, and she saw that he had changed from his wedding finery into a dark dressing gown. His hair was slightly damp, as though he had just bathed, and his feet were bare. The intimacy of it made Eleanor's breath catch. "I wanted to speak with you," he said, stopping a careful distance away. "About tonight." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "I understand my duties, Your Grace. Alexander, I will not shirk them." "Duties." He said the word as though it tasted bitter. "Eleanor, look at me." She raised her eyes to his face and saw not desire, but concern. "I did not marry you to claim some conjugal right," he said quietly. "I married you because I wanted you in my life, because I hoped we might build something real together. But that takes time and trust, and I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for." "But society expects—" "Society can wait." He moved closer, kneeling before her chair so that their eyes were level. "I want you to be comfortable with me, Eleanor. I want you to come to me willingly, not out of obligation. So I am asking you, what do you want tonight?" The question was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had been taught about marriage, that Eleanor could only stare at him. I do not know." "Then let me make a suggestion." Alexander took her hand gently. "Come to bed with me, not to consummate our marriage, but simply to sleep. Let me hold you. Let us grow accustomed to each other's presence. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready for more, you need only tell me." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. "You are not what I expected. Neither are you," he replied with a slight smile. "But I am beginning to think that is exactly why we might suit each other." And so, in a wedding night unlike any other, Eleanor allowed Alexander to lead her to the massive bed, to help her settle beneath the covers, and to lie beside her with a careful distance between them. He did not touch her beyond holding her hand, did not demand anything she was not ready to give. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" His voice was warm, close enough that she could feel his breath against her hair. "For seeing me," she said. "Not as a problem to be solved or a duty to be fulfilled, but as a person. No one has done that in a very long time." "Then they were fools," Alexander replied, "and I am grateful for their foolishness, because it brought you to me." Eleanor fell asleep that night with her hand still clasped in her husband's, and for the first time in months, she did not dream of falling. Instead, she dreamed of flying, of soaring above the world with someone who would not let her fall. The London season of 1819 would be remembered as the year the Duke of Ravensmere brought his unexpected Duchess to town. Eleanor had spent the winter months at Ravensmere Abbey, learning the intricacies of managing a great household under Lady Beatrice's patient tutelage. She had also spent those months learning her husband. Alexander was a man of contradictions. In public he was cold, controlled, every inch the powerful Duke. In private he was thoughtful, surprisingly gentle, and possessed of a dry humour that often caught Eleanor off guard. They had fallen into a comfortable routine. Breakfast together, afternoons spent in companionable silence in the library, evenings discussing everything from politics to poetry. And at night, they shared a bed with an intimacy that had grown slowly from that first chaste wedding night. Alexander had kept his word, never pushing for more than Eleanor was ready to give. But gradually, as trust built between them, so too did desire. The first time Eleanor had kissed him of her own volition, she had felt him tremble with restrained need. The first time she had asked him to truly make her his wife, he had worshipped her with a reverence that had brought tears to her eyes. Now, as their carriage rolled through London streets toward their townhouse in Mayfair, Eleanor felt both anticipation and dread. The season would be her true test, not as a duchess in the safety of her husband's estate, but as a duchess among the wolves of high society. "You are nervous," Alexander observed, his hand finding hers. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "What if I fail? What if I embarrass you?" "Impossible." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You could never embarrass me, Eleanor, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." The Ravensmere townhouse was a magnificent structure on Berkeley Square, all white stone and elegant proportions. Eleanor barely had time to admire it before they were swept into a whirlwind of social obligations. Calls to be made, invitations to be answered, a presentation at court to be prepared for. Lady Beatrice, who had accompanied them to London, took charge of Eleanor's social education with military precision. "You must be seen at Almack's, of course, and the Duchess of Devonshire's ball is essential, but we must be strategic. Too much visibility too soon will invite criticism, but too little will suggest you are hiding." Eleanor's head spun with the complexities of ton politics, but she did her best to absorb every lesson. She was fitted for more gowns, taught the subtle art of the cut direct, and drilled on the genealogies of every important family in London. Her first major test came at a musical hosted by Lady Pemberton, not the landlady from Eleanor's past, but a society matron known for her influence. Eleanor entered the drawing room on Alexander's arm, aware of every eye turning toward them, every conversation pausing mid-sentence. "The Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere," the butler announced. Eleanor felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers, a silent message of support. Together they moved into the room, and the whispers began. "Is that really her? So plain. I expected someone more. They say she was a servant when he found her." "No, a governess. Or was it a companion?" Eleanor kept her head high, her expression serene, even as each whisper felt like a small cut. But then a familiar voice cut through the speculation. "Your Grace, how delightful to see you in town." Eleanor turned to see a woman approaching, and her breath caught. It was Mrs. Agatha Thornbury, the woman who had offered her the position as companion, the position Eleanor had never actually taken. "Mrs. Thornbury," Eleanor said carefully, "how unexpected to see you here." "Indeed, I was so surprised to receive your letter explaining that you had married instead of taking the position with my niece." Mrs. Thornbury's eyes twinkled with genuine warmth. "Though I must say, you have done rather better for yourself than I could have arranged. A duchess, who would have imagined?" The conversation that followed was brief but crucial. Mrs. Thornbury's obvious approval, her casual confirmation that Eleanor had indeed been engaged as a respectable companion, did much to silence the more vicious rumours. By the time the musicale ended, Eleanor had been cautiously accepted by several influential ladies, and Alexander looked at her with undisguised pride. "You were magnificent," he said, as their carriage carried them home. "I was terrified," Eleanor corrected, but she was smiling. "Terror and magnificence are not mutually exclusive." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, Eleanor. You have faced every challenge with such grace." The season progressed, and Eleanor found her footing. She would never be the most fashionable or the most charming, but she discovered that she had her own strengths. She was intelligent, well-read, and genuinely interested in people. She made friends among the bluestockings and the reformers, the women who valued substance over style, and then came the Hastings ball. Eleanor had not seen Lady Cordelia since the wedding, but she knew the woman had been spreading subtle poison about her throughout the season. So when the invitation arrived for the Earl of Hastings' annual ball, Eleanor knew it was a trap. Cordelia would be on her home ground, surrounded by allies, ready to humiliate the upstart Duchess. "We do not have to attend," Alexander said, reading the invitation with a frown. "Yes, we do," Eleanor replied. "If we avoid it, it will look like cowardice, and I am tired of being afraid." The night of the ball, Eleanor dressed with particular care. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the colour of her eyes, with diamonds at her throat and wrists, the Ravensmere diamonds, which had not been worn in a generation. Her hair was dressed in an elegant style that emphasized her graceful neck, and when she descended the stairs to where Alexander waited, she saw his eyes darken with desire. "You are breathtaking," he said hoarsely. "I am ready," she replied. "Let us go face the lions." The Hastings ballroom was a glittering spectacle, filled with the cream of society. Eleanor entered on Alexander's arm, and once again felt the weight of every gaze, but this time she did not flinch. She had earned her place here, and she would not apologize for it. Lady Cordelia approached within minutes, resplendent in a gown of gold silk that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire trousseau. "Your Grace," she said to Alexander, barely glancing at Eleanor. "How kind of you to attend. I know how challenging social events can be for those unaccustomed to them." "Indeed," Eleanor said before Alexander could respond. "I remember my first season as a girl. I was so nervous I spilled lemonade on the French ambassador. But one learns, does one not? Though I suppose some lessons take longer than others." The barb was subtle but unmistakable, and several nearby guests hid smiles. Lady Cordelia's eyes narrowed. "I understand you were quite desperate when the Duke found you," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by those around them. "Living in some squalid boarding house, I believe? How fortunate that he took pity on you." The room had gone quiet, everyone waiting to see how Eleanor would respond. She felt Alexander tense beside her, but she laid a gentle hand on his arm, silently asking him to let her handle this. "You are quite right, Lady Cordelia," Eleanor said clearly. "I was desperate. I had lost my father, my home, and my prospects. I was alone in the world with no one to protect me, and yes, Alexander, the Duke, offered me salvation, but not out of pity." She turned to look up at her husband, and the love she saw in his eyes gave her courage to continue. "He offered me salvation because he saw something in me worth saving, because he believed I had value beyond my circumstances. And every day since, he has proven that his belief was not misplaced. So yes, I was desperate, but I am desperate no longer. I am the Duchess of Ravensmere, and I am exactly where I belong." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from across the room, someone began to applaud. Eleanor turned to see the Duchess of Devonshire, one of the most powerful women in society, clapping slowly and deliberately. Others joined in, and within moments the entire ballroom was applauding. Lady Cordelia's face had gone white with fury, but there was nothing she could say, nothing she could do. Eleanor had won. Alexander leaned down to whisper in her ear, his voice rough with emotion. "Have I mentioned today that I love you?" Eleanor's heart stopped. In all their months together, through all their growing intimacy, he had never said those words. She turned to face him fully, searching his eyes for any sign of doubt or obligation, but found only truth. "You love me," she whispered. "Desperately," he replied. "Completely. From that moment in the churchyard, though I did not have the wisdom to recognize it then. I love you, Eleanor, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to believe it could be real." "It is real," Alexander said fiercely. "We are real. And no one, not Lady Cordelia, not society, not anyone, can take that from us." He kissed her then in the middle of the Hastings ballroom, in front of all of society, with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor was breathless and laughing, and the applause had begun again. They left the ball shortly after, neither of them interested in staying longer. In the carriage ride home, Alexander pulled Eleanor onto his lap, kissing her with an urgency that spoke of months of restrained desire finally unleashed. "I need you," he murmured against her lips. "God, Eleanor, I need you so much." "Then take me home," she replied. "Take me home and show me." And he did, carrying her up the stairs of their townhouse, dismissing the servants with a curt order, and making love to her with a reverence and passion that left them both shaking. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known. "I was so lost," she whispered, "and you found me." "No," Alexander corrected gently. "We found each other, and we will never be lost again." Spring came to Ravensmere Abbey with a riot of colour that seemed to mirror Eleanor's transformation. The gardens, which had been dormant and grey during the winter months, burst into life with daffodils and tulips, cherry blossoms and lilacs. Eleanor walked among them on a warm May morning, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, the other holding a letter from Lady Beatrice in London. "The ton has quite forgotten their initial scepticism," her aunt by marriage had written. "You are now considered a great romantic success, and several ambitious mothers have begun pushing their daughters toward love matches rather than mercenary arrangements. You have started a revolution, my dear, though I suspect you did not intend to." Eleanor smiled at the thought. She had not intended to revolutionize anything. She had simply tried to survive, and in surviving had found something far more precious than security. She had found love, purpose, and a place where she truly belonged. "There you are!" Alexander's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. "I have been searching everywhere for you." Eleanor turned to see her husband approaching, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the wind, his cravat loosened in the informal way he only allowed at home. In the 8 months since their wedding, he had become even more dear to her, not just as a husband, but as a partner, a friend, and the father of the child she carried. "I was reading Aunt Beatrice's letter," she said, holding it up. "Apparently we are now a romantic ideal." Alexander laughed, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that acknowledged her condition. "How absurd! We are simply two people who were fortunate enough to find each other." "Fortunate," Eleanor repeated, thinking of that desperate night when she had stumbled into his chamber. "Is that what we are calling it? What would you call it?" he asked, his lips brushing her temple. "A miracle," she said softly. "A series of impossible coincidences that led me exactly where I needed to be." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by new life, and Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her father's grave, about the churchyard where Alexander had first seen her, about the storm that had brought her to the wrong estate, about the wrong chamber that had become so right. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying me so impulsively? You could have had anyone. A great heiress, a woman of impeccable lineage, someone who would have brought you political connections or vast estates." Alexander pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Eleanor, I have estates enough. I have wealth beyond measure, and a title that opens every door. What I did not have, what I had never had, was someone who saw me rather than what I represented. Someone who challenged me, who made me laugh, who made me want to be better than I was." He cupped her face in his hands. "You gave me that. You gave me everything that matters. So no, I do not regret marrying you. I only regret that I did not find you sooner." Eleanor kissed him then, pouring into that kiss all the love and gratitude she felt. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling through tears. "I have something to tell you," she said. "I went to see Dr. Morrison yesterday." Alexander's face immediately filled with concern. "Is something wrong?" "The baby is perfectly healthy," Eleanor assured him quickly. "But Dr. Morrison believes there may be two." "Two?" Alexander stared at her. "Twins? It is not certain, but he thinks it likely." Eleanor watched her husband's face carefully, uncertain how he would react to this news. For a moment, Alexander simply stood there, processing. Then a smile spread across his face, not his usual controlled expression, but a grin of pure, unrestrained joy. He let out a whoop of laughter and spun Eleanor carefully in his arms, mindful of her condition but unable to contain his happiness. "Twins!" he exclaimed. "Eleanor, we are going to have twins!" His joy was infectious, and Eleanor found herself laughing with him, all her worries dissolving in the face of his obvious delight. When he finally set her down, he immediately knelt before her, pressing kisses to her belly, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Hello, little ones," he murmured. "Your mother and I cannot wait to meet you, and I promise you, you will never doubt that you are loved, that you are wanted, that you are the greatest gifts I could ever receive." Eleanor ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling this man had brought into her life. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," he said, rising and pulling her close again. "With you beside me, I think I can manage anything." They walked back to the house together, making plans for the nursery, discussing names, imagining the future that stretched before them. As they entered the great hall, Eleanor paused to look around at the home that had once seemed so foreign and now felt like the only place she had ever truly belonged. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" she asked Alexander. "When I woke up in your chamber." "I said many things that morning," he replied, "most of them probably ill-advised. You said, 'I've waited for you.'" Eleanor turned to face him. "Did you mean it?" Alexander's expression grew serious. "I did not know I meant it at the time. But yes, Eleanor, I had been waiting for you my entire life. I just did not know what I was waiting for until I saw you." "I was not waiting for you," Eleanor admitted. "I was not waiting for anything except the next disaster, the next loss, the next blow. But you taught me that it is possible to hope again, to trust again, to love again." "Then we have both been transformed," Alexander said. "You have made me human, Eleanor. Before you I was simply a title, a fortune, a name in Debrett's. Now I am a husband, soon to be a father, and a man who knows what it means to be truly happy." News of the Duchess's condition spread through the household with the speed of wildfire, and by evening the entire staff was celebrating. Cook prepared Eleanor's favorite dishes, the housekeeper had flowers placed in every room, and even the usually stoic butler was seen smiling. As summer progressed, Eleanor's belly grew, and with it, her confidence in her role as Duchess. She had taken on the management of the estate's charitable works, establishing a school for the tenant farmers' children and a fund to help women in circumstances similar to those she had once faced. She corresponded with reformers in London, hosted intellectual salons at the Abbey, and became known as a duchess who cared more for substance than style. And through it all, Alexander was beside her, supporting her initiatives, defending her choices, and loving her with a constancy that never wavered. One afternoon in late July, as Eleanor rested in the garden with a book she was too distracted to read, she received an unexpected visitor. A carriage bearing an unfamiliar crest pulled up to the house, and a woman emerged, elegantly dressed, perhaps 40 years old, with a kind face and nervous manner. "Your Grace," the woman said, curtsying deeply. "Forgive the intrusion. My name is Mrs. Charlotte Hartley. I believe I am your father's cousin." Eleanor's breath caught. She had thought all her father's family had abandoned them after his disgrace. "Mrs. Hartley, I did not know any of my father's relations wished to acknowledge me." "To my shame, we did not," Mrs. Hartley said, tears in her eyes. "We were cowards, Your Grace. We let fear of association with scandal override our duty to family. But when I heard of your marriage, of your success, I could not bear my guilt any longer. I have come to apologize and to ask if you might find it in your heart to forgive me." Eleanor looked at this woman who shared her blood, who had abandoned her in her darkest hour, and felt not anger, but a profound sadness for all the time they had lost. But she also felt something else, the security of knowing that she no longer needed her father's family. She had built her own family now, with Alexander and the children they would soon welcome. "I forgive you, Mrs. Hartley," Eleanor said gently, "not because you deserve it, but because I have learned that holding on to bitterness only poisons the one who carries it. You are welcome to visit, to know me and my children if you wish, but you should know that I am no longer the desperate girl you once knew. I am the Duchess of Ravensmere, and I have found my place in the world." Mrs. Hartley wept with relief and gratitude, and though Eleanor could never fully trust her, she allowed a cautious relationship to develop. It was another piece of her past reclaimed and transformed, another wound healed. As autumn painted the trees in gold and crimson, Eleanor went into labor on a crisp October morning. The birth was long and difficult, but Alexander never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement and love. And when the midwife finally placed two tiny, perfect babies in Eleanor's arms, a boy and a girl, both with dark hair and their mother's grey eyes, Eleanor looked up at her husband and saw tears streaming down his face. "They are perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. God, Eleanor, I love you so much." "I love you too," she replied, exhausted but radiant. "We did it, Alexander. We made a family." They named the boy Thomas, after Eleanor's father, and the girl Beatrice, after the aunt who had guided them both. And as Eleanor held her children close with Alexander's arms around them all, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been lost, desperate, alone. She had stumbled into the wrong chamber on the wrong night and found the right man at the right time. She had been offered a choice: to accept salvation from an unexpected source or to cling to pride and face ruin. She had chosen to trust, to hope, to try. And in trying, she had found everything she had never dared to dream of. Years later, when her children asked how she and their father had met, Eleanor would tell them the truth about the storm, the wrong carriage, the wrong chamber, and the Duke who had whispered, "I've waited for you." She would tell them about fear and courage, about loss and redemption, about the strange and winding paths that lead us to where we are meant to be. "Your father saved me," she would say, "but I saved him too. We saved each other. And that, my darlings, is what love really means. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing every day to build something beautiful together." And in the gardens of Ravensmere Abbey, where flowers bloomed year after year in endless cycles of death and rebirth, Eleanor Ashford, Duchess of Ravensmere, lived out her days in the kind of happiness that comes not from perfect circumstances, but from perfect love, the love of a man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up, the love of children who would never know the desperation she had once faced, and the love of a life well lived in a place where she had finally, truly, bloomed. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear which part of this journey touched your heart the most, and from which corner of the world you're listening. Your support means everything, and it helps me continue bringing you stories of love, hope, and transformation. Thank you for being here.